The title of my talk is Artificial Intelligence and Leadership, a Franciscan Perspective. I have published those books on economics that you can see on the screen in English, the two at the left-hand side, Spanish, German, Polish, Italian, and Portuguese. We will examine how the ethical principles of the Franciscan Economic Tradition and the Economy of Francesco can guide the integration of artificial intelligence into business leadership. Emphasizing leadership as service, we will advocate for participatory and ethically grounded governance that prioritizes human dignity and intrinsic motivations. It is essential to ensure that the increasing automation of decision-making processes does not lead to the personalization or the erosion of intrinsic motivations. Instead of purely instrumental relationships focused on material gain and selfish interests, business leaders must promote autonomy, human development, and the intrinsic motivations of employees so that they assume the social function of the company. By automating repetitive activities, artificial intelligence affords leaders the opportunity to concentrate more fully on those relational aspects of leadership that require discernment and excellence. Echoing Christ's words, "Let the greatest among you be as the youngest, and the leader as the servant," the Church affirms a model of leadership inspired by the Son of Man, who did not come to be served, but to serve. Within this framework, Christian social thought envisions the firm as a community of persons in which everyone is responsible for all. Leaders are not only those with titles, but also those who exercise influence for the good of the other, from company CEOs and members of boards and directors to team leaders to people with informal influence, says the Vatican. The Church does not deny the importance of economic profit, but subordinates it to higher social and relational values. Specifically, it promotes the dignity of the person, the common good, and sustainability above mere material profits. The Church, says Centesimus Annus, acknowledges the legitimate role of profit as an indication that the business is functional well. When a firm makes a profit, this means that productive factors have been properly employed and corresponding human needs have been duly satisfied. But profitability is not the only indicator of a firm's condition. Here is the first part of my talk. The opening section of this presentation outlines two fundamental models of business leadership, emphasizing the need to foster intrinsic motivations. The subsequent section examines Francis of Assisi's understanding of authority and leadership, insights that Pope Francis has taken up to formulate his proposal for a new economy. This is part 3. Finally, drawing on these reflections, part 4 examines the growing influence of artificial intelligence on the exercise of business leadership. In our efficiency-driven society, priority is given to quarterly profits, gross domestic product, and stock performance, while harm to the ecosystem, social inequalities, and respect for human dignity are often ignored. Shareholder value has become virtually the sole metric by which business leaders determine their performance and their worth. In the current climate, the call to maximize shareholder wealth remains the dominant and is the leading theory taught in many business schools. Efficiency prevails over ethics in this utilitarian mindset. Values are seen as relative, measured by their contribution to individual preferences and business gains. There is, however, another economic approach that connects with the contribution of the Franciscans in this field, commonly referred to as civil economy. In this humanistic conception of the economy, the main actor is neither the selfish individual, capitalism, nor the paternalistic state, collectivism, but the civil society itself. The economic system will be efficient if it achieves public happiness, fostering mutual assistance, reciprocal trust, and relational goods. We will now examine two models of business leadership, transactional and transformational, that may be associated with these two types of economy, though other approaches are also possible. Transactional leadership is hierarchical and efficiency-driven. This leadership became prevalent during the 19th century, imitating military-style chains of command. At that time, repetitive and segmented tasks predominated, where workers operated like cogs in a well-coordinated machine. In that context of large-scale manufacturing, the leader was responsible for maximizing productivity, controlling the workforce, and streamlining decision-making. Many companies still rely on this model. Becoming a leader requires many years of service and faithful performance of one's job. Once in a position of responsibility, the manager tries to encourage employee participation through material rewards, bonuses, and promotions. Bureaucratic efficiency is pursued by establishing clear rules, roles, and procedures. This type of leadership is pyramidal, authoritarian, controlling, task-oriented, and focused on short-term goals. It prioritizes order and discipline over creativity and the holistic well-being of employees, physical, mental, psychological, moral, and spiritual. Decision-making is hierarchical and top-down, based on a strict chain of command that flows from top executives to middle management and finally to workers. When evaluating a CEO, their material efficiency and market capitalization are considered, while other factors, such as their influence on workers' well-being or carbon emissions, are ignored or relegated into the background. The emphasis on control stifles innovation and diminishes employees' sense of belonging to the company. The system is slow to respond to social changes, as it prioritizes rigid compliance with orders received, rather than stimulating creativity and shared responsibility. With transformational leadership, however, the structure shifts from a pyramid to a circle, as this leadership style is shared, visionary, people-centered, and based on participatory decision-making. Rather than imposing, it seeks to inspire and motivate, so that all members embrace the why of the company and feel co-responsible for its ideals, goals, and social mission. The shared vision stimulates creativity, excellence, and intrinsic motivations. Leaders follow the principle of subsidiarity, clearly defining the scope of autonomy and decision-making at every level of the company, thereby nurturing mutual respect and shared responsibility among all personnel. Instead of focusing on rigidly enforcing their authority, the leader encourages each employee to be valued in their dignity, to enthusiastically embrace the company's social purpose, and to feel motivated to actively contribute to its fulfillment. This type of leadership is ethical, participatory, and inclusive. It supports agile, collaborative, and well-grounded decision-making. While empowering employees, leaders take on the role of facilitators, moving away from the traditional authority figures typical of the transactional model. Extrinsic motivations and negative anthropology. Standard economic theory is based on a negative conception of the human being, homo homini lupus, defining them as utilitarian, anonymous, radically self-interested, and therefore predictable, homo economicus. Based on these assumptions, the general equilibrium theory, which emerged at the end of the 19th century, attempts to construct a rational mechanics of economic behavior inspired by the physical mathematical model of the 19th century, Newton, Galileo. Market decisions are analyzed in an objective, mathematical way based on indifference. It is assumed that in business no one looks the other in the eye, business is business, and that everyone responds to the most absolute competitiveness. Your death is my life. It is worth clarifying, however, that Adam Smith, Thomas Malthus, and Keynes, and many other liberals, did not exclude the relevance of ethical values, religious beliefs, and intrinsic motivations. However, they asserted that for the economist, it is sufficient to analyze and enhance intrinsic motivations, utility, interest, in order to increase the efficiency of the system. Consequently, they built the economic discourse on the premise that in this field, everyone acts driven by extrinsic motivations, such as monetary incentives. Crowding out effect. Contradicting the traditional view of Homo economicus, the Zurich school, represented by Bruno Frey, has emphasized the importance of intrinsic motivations and developed the theory of motivational crowding out. This phenomenon occurs when a person's intrinsic motivations, values, ideals, are replaced by extrinsic ones. According to this school, both positive stimuli, money or rewards, and negative ones, punishments, strict regulations, can weaken an individual's ethical and social sense. Values and ideals are displaced by the desire to obtain superficial compensation. The person thus ceases to act out of conviction and begins to act solely in pursuit of external or superficial results. It is no coincidence that incentive theory was consolidated between the two world wars, a period marked by anthropological pessimism and the rise of fascist and totalitarian ideologies. In that context, economic liberalism, based on the idea that cost-benefit calculation is the main driver of human behavior, proposed incentives as a more civilized form of control, compared to the coercive methods of collectivist regimes. Positive incentives, bonuses. In a classic study conducted in 1970, Richard Edmonds compared the British system of voluntary blood donation with the American one, which was run by private for-profit companies. Surprisingly, he found that people were more generous when they did not receive monetary compensation. When donors were paid, both their internal motivation and the social recognition of their altruistic act, social reward, were devaluated. Luigino Bruni provides a revealing example. A girl who had lovingly cared for her disabled brother for years began asking for money to do other household chores after her parents decided to reward her financially for taking care of her brother. In other words, her emotional motivation was replaced by an economic one. This phenomenon, known as the spillover effect, shows how monetary incentives affect not only the specific action, but also other related motivations. Bruni also mentions the case of families who used to separate their waste out of ecological commitment, but stopped doing so when the local council began to pay for it. If what we did is only worth as much, they said, we might as well do something else. Giuseppe Reggiani recounts similar stories. For instance, a child who began demanding money for any household chore after receiving a payment for taking out the trash. Or neighbors who changed their attitude when one of them was rewarded for allowing a water purifier to be installed on his land. In all these cases, external incentives stifle internal motivations. A similar situation occurs in the business world. Many leaders choose to motivate their employees solely through material rewards, money, benefits, without fostering genuine commitment to the company's social goals. This strategy may attract those seeking financial gains, but it does not generate altruistic involvement. On the other hand, employees become truly committed when they identify with the values and objectives of the project. Therefore, a leader must strengthen intrinsic motivations, making work not just a means of earning income, but above all, a source of meaning and personal fulfillment. It is about inspiring employees through purpose and conviction, not through fear of self-interest. Negative incentives, fines, punishments. An experimental study conducted in 1998 at various nurseries in Israel showed that sanctions that affect intrinsic motivation can produce the opposite effect to that intended. In those nurseries, many parents often arrived late to pick up their children, thus causing additional costs. The experiment divided the nurseries into two groups. In the first group, a monetary fine was introduced to discourage late pickups, while no changes were made in the second group. Surprisingly, after 12 weeks, late pickups increased in the first group. Parents began paying the fine and arriving late more frequently. In the other group, levels remained stable. The negative incentive, the fine, had the opposite effect to what was intended, as it undermined the intrinsic motivations that had previously been present. Before the sanction was imposed, most parents tried to arrive on time out of consideration and respect for the educational staff. However, after the introduction of the financial penalty, the behavior was reinterpreted. Paying the fine became to be perceived as an acceptable fee for being late. Even after the fine was removed, the experiment continued for 4 additional weeks, during which the absence of the penalty did not lead to a significant increase in late arrivals. Intrinsic motivations. In recent decades, economic theory has gradually moved beyond its technocratic and mechanistic approach, opening up to a broader understanding of human behavior. This shift has led to the recognition of intrinsic motivations, non-instrumental relationships, reciprocity, and the pursuit of public happiness as relevant elements in economic processes. There is now less talk on a war of interests and more on contracts, cooperation, and consensus. This change has been driven, among other factors, by advances in behavioral and experimental economics, as well as contributions from neuroeconomics and cognitive psychology. The happiness paradox. Richard Easterling formulated the happiness paradox, Easterling paradox, in 1974, which states that while a rise in material wealth may lead to a temporary increase in socio-emotional well-being, it does not guarantee lasting happiness over the long term. Bruno S. Fry argues that social relationships and justice are more important than money for achieving enduring well-being. Fry uses the metaphor of the treadmill to illustrate how economic incentives and instrumental motivations tend to lose their effectiveness over time because people quickly become accustomed to these material improvements, the hedonic treadmill, and then aspire to even more, the satisfaction treadmill. They run faster, yet remain in the same place. For example, acquiring a new cell phone may bring considerable initial satisfaction, but this fades quickly, especially when others acquire similar or better devices. In fact, in developed countries, subjective happiness has not increased significantly, despite consistent growth in per capita income. An exception to this trend can be found in relational goods, such as friendship, family, and volunteering, as well as those of cultural or identity-based nature, art, tradition, spirituality, whose value is not diminished by competitive logic and tend to have a deeper and more lasting emotional impact. Rewards instead of incentives. The crowding out effect can also occur in the opposite direction, that is, by strengthening intrinsic motivations rather than weakening them. For example, in spiritual and social life, persons who discover their vocations and strive to follow it are reinforcing their internal motivations, since the new sense of purpose energizes them and guides their path. Using Bauman's metaphor, we could say they move from being tourists to being pilgrims. A positive alternative to instrumental incentives are symbolic or social rewards. For their effect to be positive, it is essential that the recipient perceives them not as a hidden form of control or as part of transactional logic, do this and you'll get a reward, but rather as a genuine, unconditional, and meaningful expression of recognition. Thank you for your contribution. A concrete example is the Nobel Prize, which not only includes a financial award, but more importantly, represents a high level of public recognition. Similarly, medals of honor function along the same lines. Under these conditions, rewards not only avoid undermining intrinsic motivations, but they actually strengthen them, while also promoting autonomy, mutual trust, and a sense of belonging. With this in mind, business leaders should trust their team members and employees, encourage their autonomy, explicitly acknowledge their efforts, and strengthen their sense of responsibility and belonging. In this way, they help build an organizational culture based on shared values, common purposes, and a shared vision. Franciscan vision of leadership. Francis of Assisi offers a theological and fraternal perspective on leadership. He wants the general minister of the friars to be the Holy Spirit, from whom everyone must obey. Superiors must be ministers and servants, who welcome and humbly accompany the friars. In this way, Francis overturns the pyramidal structure of that society. At the same time, he encourages each friar to cultivate a personal relationship with his minister, and not to break it, even when he could not obey him for reasons of conscience. His emphasis on fraternal relationships was a significant change from the hierarchical models that dominated religious life at the time. The abbot of a monastery was typically of noble origin and assumed the authority of the pater familias as shaped by Roman law. Francis, however, sought to create a fraternity of equals, built on fraternal love and mutual support, without dependencies or paternalism. Rather than fathers, superiors should behave like mothers. Many of his ministers have a very different concept of autonomy, and lamented that Francis had assigned them such a weak potestas. These ministers were inclined toward a legalistic mentality, which is expression of the logic of power, and addresses conflicts by assigning tasks and setting boundaries. Nevertheless, these ministers were unable to impose their will, as they might have wished. The civil economy. The Franciscan conception of the economy falls within what is currently known as civil economy. The mounts of piety promoted by the Franciscans in the 13th to 15th centuries have been considered the first great institution of civil economy. At the end of the 16th century, another economic model of a capitalist nature gained strength, and eventually prevailed with the Industrial Revolution. However, in the 18th century, the tradition of civil economy was revived and developed by the Italian school, represented especially by Antonio Genovesi, in sharp contrast to mercantilist individualism, 16th to 18th centuries, and the utilitarianism of Jeremy Bentham. Currently, civil economy has experienced renewed interest through contemporary initiatives such as the Economy of Communion and the Economy of Francesco. Leadership and public happiness. In the civil economy, the primary task of the leader is not to promote public happiness and foster relationships of trust, collaboration, and reciprocity among all economic actors, workers, entrepreneurs, consumers, instead of focusing on formal contracts and transactional logic. This form of leadership promotes reciprocity, civic virtues, and social trust. These leaders are not authoritarian, but inspiring and inclusive. They seek to ensure that everyone plays a leading role, shares the civic ideals of the enterprise, and feels respected in their dignity. They motivate through purpose, not fear, and do not appeal to selfish interest. Work and economic activity are presented not merely as means to gain profit, but above all as sources of personal meaning and collective well-being. In this approach, economic efficiency is tied to justice, social inclusion, and sustainability. The company is not only a unit of production, but also a space for civic and ethical formation. Leadership according to Pope Francis. In line with the Franciscan tradition, the Synod of Synodality has emphasized the importance of listening, collaboration, and collegial decision-making. Pope Francis insists that we need to sit down to listen to others, to pay attention to the other, just as St. Francis did. A synodal church is a church which listens, which realizes that listening is more than simply hearing. It is a mutual listening in which everyone has something to learn. The faithful people, the College of Bishops, the Bishop of Rome, all listening to each other and all listening to the Holy Spirit. He also affirms that the vocation of an entrepreneur is a noble vocation, provided that those engaged in it see themselves challenged by a greater meaning in life. This will enable them truly to serve the common good. This vocation will be betrayed when the sole criterion for action in business is thought to be the maximization of profit. Indeed, the Christian community needs inspiring leadership that fosters participation, creativity, and the enthusiastic commitment of all its members to the common life. Service and listening. Synodality requires a review of the type of leadership exercised in the Church, including the exercise of the Petrine primacy. Indeed, the Pope is not by himself above the Church, but within it as one of the baptized, and within the College of Bishops as a bishop among bishops. Pope Francis also underlines that bishops sometimes will have to walk behind the people, allowing the flock to strike out on new paths. Authority is not questioned, but it is affirmed that it must be exercised with an attitude of service and listening. The bishop is both teacher and disciple. He is a teacher when endowed with the special assistance of the Holy Spirit. He proclaims to the faithful the word of truth in the name of Christ, head and shepherd. But he is a disciple when, knowing that the Spirit has been bestowed upon every baptized person, he listens to the voice of Christ, speaking through the entire people of God, making it infallible in credendo. During the Synod of the Amazon, the Pope invited indigenous peoples, and with them all of us, to feel co-responsible for the life of local churches. Help your bishops, he said, and help your men and women missionaries to be one with you, and in this way, by an inclusive dialogue, to shape a church with an Amazonian face, a church with a native face. The importance of practical wisdom, justice, and prudence. The inclusive, supportive, ethical, and sustainable economy proposed by Pope Francis requires a leadership based on practical wisdom and justice, that is, on the ability to make sensible judgments and establish righteous relationships oriented toward the common good. A true economic leader must know how to translate ethical principles into concrete, realistic, and achievable options, considering the means and resources available. This practical wisdom is complemented by the virtue of prudence, understood not as a self-interested calculation, but as the art of discerning the best course of action for building good and just companies that can contribute to the common good. As creators of wealth and prosperity, businesses and their leaders must find ways to make a just distribution of this wealth to employees, following the principle of the right to a just wage. Customers, just prices. Owners, just returns. Suppliers, just prices. And the community too, just tax payments and other contributions to the community. Thus, this is a collaborative and facilitative leadership style, capable of stimulating everyone's participation in decision-making and task allocation. Artificial intelligence and intrinsic motivations. Artificial intelligence is gaining prominence in the business world to manage the vast amount of data generated by increasing digitalization and connectivity. Its role is becoming increasingly essential in both operational management and interaction with employees and customers. Senior executives from 600 organizations dedicated to digital transformation confirmed the strategic value of artificial intelligence in a recent study published by Harvard Business Review. In other recent research, such as IBM's Global AI Adoption Index, most CEOs consider artificial intelligence to be essential for maintaining competitiveness and making sound decisions. In an international survey conducted in 2024, one-third of the 4,701 CEOs consulted acknowledged that generative artificial intelligence has had a positive impact on increasing revenue and profitability in their companies. Furthermore, 56% indicated that this technology has significantly contributed to improving work efficiency. Over 40% warned that without artificial intelligence, their organizations might cease to be viable within a decade. Reflecting this almost unanimous sentiment, some experts suggest that in the future, artificial intelligence could potentially replace human leadership. The influence of artificial intelligence on business leadership. Artificial intelligence is reshaping leadership, strategic planning, and business management. It facilitates decision-making thanks to its ability to automate processes and analyze vast amounts of data, allowing for more accurate identification of potential customer behaviors, as well as anticipating market trends, risks, and economic fluctuations. This improves financial forecasting and supports well-founded strategic decisions. AI-based systems can also automate routine and repetitive tasks, managing data in real time. By alleviating the operational burden, executives can focus on key decisions more quickly and effectively. In this evolving context, artificial intelligence is accelerating the shift from a traditional leadership model, largely based on personal intuition and experience, towards approaches guided by data analysis and digital tools. Leaders who possess digital skills, adaptability in the face of change, and the capacity to manage hybrid or virtual teams are increasingly vital to organizational success. Artificial intelligence and the risk of weakening intrinsic motivations. Many companies have adopted AI to optimize processes and reduce operating costs. While such initiatives may enhance efficiency, this predominantly mechanistic and instrumental approach often marginalizes personal development and employee autonomy, thereby diminishing intrinsic motivation. Employees will obviously feel demotivated if AI takes charge of defining the company's objectives and making strategic decisions. AI use can reduce the direct human interaction, privileging algorithmic decision-making. It can also monitor the performance of each worker, thereby reducing their autonomy and prioritizing external compliance over creativity and commitment. The shift risks depersonalizing management and fostering authoritarian, controlling, transactional leadership styles. It is difficult for workers to feel emotionally involved with the company if they feel like anonymous cogs in an automated system. How to enhance intrinsic motivation with AI? While there are legitimate concerns about AI's negative impact on employee motivation, it is important to avoid catastrophic interpretations, says Pope Francis. When implemented thoughtfully, AI can in fact produce the opposite effect. By automating routine tasks, leaders are afforded greater time and cognitive resources to focus on the human aspects of management, paying greater attention to employee well-being, autonomy, interpersonal involvement, and development. Liberated from ordinary and repetitive tasks, leaders can focus on fostering everyone's participation in carrying out the company's purpose and innovation. This would create a fairer, more equitable, and inclusive work environment that enhances creativity and collaboration. AI can promote more participative and democratic government models, decentralizing decision-making processes, and supporting more cooperative organizational structures. It can also strengthen mutual trust by creating spaces for generating open dialogue and feedback, sometimes even anonymously, thus reducing the risk of retaliation and encouraging a culture of transparency. Additionally, it can support continuous learning and adaptability to evolving work models, while also mitigating the risk of professional burnout caused by excessive workloads. Other possibilities and challenges. The new possibilities and opportunities offered by AI are accompanied by significant challenges in terms of ethics, fairness, and transparency, particularly in areas such as privacy, discriminatory hiring practices, and short-term thinking in resource allocation. Leaders are tempted to become fixated on the potential for short-term success. To achieve this, they have excessive risks and adopt dysfunctional behaviors. Indeed, one of the greatest risks for businesses is that they are almost exclusively answerable to their investors, thereby limiting their social value. Algorithmic bias. Biased or incomplete data used to train AI can lead to erroneous and discriminatory decisions. A notorious case occurred in 2018 when Amazon had to discard an AI recruitment application after discovering that it systematically discriminated against women because it had been trained mainly on male candidates' resumes. Following this scandal, many AI providers claim to audit their system internally to detect bias, though few make the results public. Overcoming these biases is technically complex and costly, but once corrected, AI can be a key ally in reducing discrimination and promoting fairer, more objective processes. For instance, AI can facilitate impartial assessments of employee talent, commitment, and development potential, as well as detect biases in customer interactions. It can also improve corporate governance by detecting possible fraud. A specific example is AI-based fintech solutions, which allow real-time analysis of transactions to identify fraudulent activities, thus contributing to safer, more objective, and transparent management. Lack of transparency and human control. Another crucial challenge is the opacity of many AI models, which operate as true black boxes, making it impossible to clearly understand how they make decisions. Companies speak of transparency, but in practice, they often conceal errors or limitations in their algorithms. For this reason, the European Union, through its AI regulatory framework, has established that a system classified as high risk must strictly comply with criteria of transparency, traceability, and human oversight. In response to these requirements, explainable AI tools have emerged, such as Watson, OpenScale, IBM, Lime, and Shap, which allow interpretation and analysis of the reasoning behind algorithmic decisions. Pope Francis rejects catastrophic interpretations of AI, but calls for an ethical development of algorithms, the algorithmics. He warns that we cannot delegate to machines decisions that profoundly affect human life. We will leave important decisions to algorithms. Who assumes responsibility when an algorithm makes a mistake in diagnosing a disease, controlling an autonomous vehicle, or managing sensitive resources? Conclusion. Francis of Assisi remains a prophetic model of leadership, capable of inspiring business people, economists, and leaders today. Pope Francis has drawn inspiration from him to promote the economy of Francesco. In contrast to the pyramidal and hierarchical structures of medieval times, characterized by rigid role assignments and a logic of formal meticulous obedience, Francis of Assisi promoted community and fraternal management, based on mutual service and the participation of all through conventual chapters. He urged his friars to voluntarily serve and obey one another. The authority of the minister and servants must be maternal, and the obedience of the brothers charitable, an expression of the unconditional love that characterizes family relationships. Inspired by him, today there is also an urgent need to promote new forms of leadership understood as service and guided by ethical values. Instead of hierarchical or transactional leadership, it is necessary to promote other models that foster intrinsic motivations and shared participatory and co-responsible decision-making. Good business decisions are rooted in principles at the foundational level, such as respect for human dignity and service to the common good, and a vision of a business as a community of persons. AI cannot be the ultimate decision maker, but only a tool that facilitates well-informed decisions, never replacing ethical and human judgment. Its use must be guided by social justice, worker well-being, and environmental sustainability, rather than subordinating everything to economic profit. Leaders, therefore, must understand how AI works in order to critically assess its results, detect possible biases, and avoid discriminatory consequences. This technical knowledge is indispensable in an increasingly interconnected world where decisions have a global and complex impact. In this regard, the development of explainable AI represents an important step forward, as it allows for some degree of human control, external verification of results, and greater transparency. Some companies have begun to implement ethics committees responsible for monitoring the fairness and social impact of their AI applications. Pope Francis teaches that AI must assist and empower human beings, not replace them. It is up to them to make the final decisions, as only they have the capacity to guide organizations in the spirit of service, and to exercise authority according to ethical values, such as intuition, empathy, and moral reasoning. Thank you so much.